Deepening our understanding. It was kind of interesting how this came up because when I first came to Unity of Missoula, David MacArthur was the minister, and he used to talk about deepening as a process, as a part of the tools that you use in the spiritual path, or perhaps it's the, for lack of another word, product of practicing the principles that Unity teaches. And I'd have to say that when I sat down to kind of look at this and say, what do I want to, what understanding am I deepening, or have I been deepening, or would I like to deepen? The first thing that hit me is that I can't believe we're in the second half of the year. I still feel like we didn't have Easter, so I mean Christmas kind of, but that's okay because I actually found a music book this morning that I've been looking for about 6 years. And it's a Christmas book, and it just showed up. So I went, okay, I got my miracle for the morning. But we've already been through faith and strength and wisdom and love and power, or if you call it mastery, and imagination. So I think I'll have to move my notes over a little bit so I can see them better. It seems to me this is an unprecedented time. And I know we've had, it's been over 100 years, but we've had a world epidemic called a pandemic before. But this seems to me more pivotal. It seems about much more than that. And it's so uncertain. And yet another part of my path, as many of you know, besides Unity, is I'm kind of a Buddhist as a hobby. And if I had my joke sign, you would know that was a tongue-in-cheek comment because that's a rigorous discipline, Buddhism. But they talk about uncertainty, and they talk about how the path that is filled with obstacles is actually not obstacles, but is the path. And so in some sense I think, wow, they must really be enjoying this uncertainty. The uncertainty of uncertainty of uncertainty is how it seems to me some days. And yet our days and our weeks and our months go by regardless of our experiences or our losses, our difficulties. And even when we have our breakthroughs and our joys in the midst of life, life is still, as 12-step groups say, life on life's terms is what we come to adapt to and use our principles to adapt to, pointing ourselves towards our ideals with hope. So we've looked at a topic that I'm going to talk about before, but we've looked at it within the context of abundance and prosperity. The understanding that I feel I've been deepening in this last half a year, interestingly enough, is about food and being fed. And spiritually especially. However, for me, spiritually means all of it. It means physical, mental, psychological, what am I missing? Emotional, and all of it together is the spirit that animates and somehow helps me to come into balance with the outer and the inner experience. And since we have such a challenging and such a new and such an unusual outer right now, I think the inner is just, I don't know if it could be more vital, but it just seems to be more vital. So I'm going to talk about food, spiritual food, and I'll just read real quickly what Edwene Gaines, who is a Unity minister, a lot of you are familiar with her work. This is from her book, The 4 Spiritual Laws of Prosperity, and she has one that is centered on tithing or giving to that which provides your spiritual food. So of course she's asked, what is spiritual food? Spiritual food is that which inspires us, which challenges us and teaches us, which reminds us of truth. And here she has truth with a capital T, which is a Unity thing. Spiritual food causes us to remember who we really are. It infills our spirit and reconnects us consciously. That's important, reconnects us in a conscious way to the awareness of our innate or inner divine self. And I'm going to kind of look at it as a vehicle to do that balancing thing between the outer and the inner. And again, physical, emotional, mental, psychic energy all coming into living this physical life. I think maybe it was Roger last week that talked about being human beings, and that we are having a physical human experience through our spirit. And how do we deepen our understanding of that? How do we deepen our understanding of what it is that feeds us? That's what I'm looking at a little bit, and it's what I have been looking at in the last few months, especially since that which feeds me, a lot of it is not tangible now. I'm not teaching voice lessons, I'm not directing choir, I'm not coaching speakers. Done a little bit of it over Zoom, but you know, it loses a lot not to be able to be right in the presence of someone as they're trying to talk about how they use their voice, and singing is very difficult. And so I always like the definitions, but I won't stick with that for too long because I always go off on something else. But I'll just give you a couple on deepening and some of the etymology there. Of course, deep is far below the surface. Now this relates to, I think again, Roger brought up Charles and what he talked about in terms of understanding. Look at the word. What stands under? What is it that I stand for? You know, also though it's used, something that's deep is penetrating. And this relates to comprehension, which the way Unity teaches the word understanding is about comprehension. That's why it's the frontal part of the brain. It's profound in our mind. And intelligence, and again, they don't use intelligence in the same way that we think of intellect. It's like they say, okay, your intellect or your wisdom even is, I got to get it right, the what. But understanding is why. Why we do what we do. And where is it coming from? What are we standing? Again, it goes in the midst of. This is very interesting. The Old English word de op, which means literally to stand in the midst of. So when I understand you and you understand me, and we deepen that understanding, we are basically, in a sense, standing in the midst of each other's experience as much as that's possible. You know, we're one then. I can't remember, I was reading somebody who said that intellect by itself leads to duality. We have to have this is good, that's bad, this is correct, that's incorrect. But when understanding comes, it balances. So this writer said, the ultimate sense that is gleaned from Old English, Middle English, Germanic, and Indo-European sources perhaps is found in the Greek, and this is for the word for understanding. Episteme, which has the sense of to be very close to. I know how, and I am in the midst of. So anyway, not to belabor that, but here's the question that came to me about all of this, and I don't know, because do we eat oxygen? But in the book Energy Speaks that the book group is reading, I found something that was so interesting, I thought. Well, there's a lot of really interesting stuff in this book. But this author, Lee Harris, Energy Speaks, well, right here he's talking about difficult circumstances and situations, and I think he's talking in particular about caregiving for someone in this time when there's so much more layers to being safe. And he says, I know that these circumstances are difficult. For example, if you are a caregiver of a loved one and you wish to make some changes, but one of the best first steps I know in general is to ask ourselves, where is the oxygen? I don't know about you, but the first time I wore a mask and went in somewhere, I think it was the first time in my life I had some sense of what a panic attack is. It wasn't that I didn't think people had them, it was just that I was like, what is that? Well, I am not able to breathe. Of course now, I'm getting used to it. But, anyway, where is the oxygen? Hang on, I gotta get my water. Sorry. I was going to put it there, I should have. So back to Lee Harris talking about, difficult, challenging circumstances. Oxygen is just a word I use for the people I love who, when they walk into the room, increase it. I can really breathe when this person is there. I am unbridled in my expression. I'm not worried that I will offend. I can be myself. And the more I can be myself, the clearer I am about the decisions and next steps that will invite the answers that I'm seeking. And the more others are able to breathe freely in my presence. And so I've just really been thinking about that and how oxygen is symbolic also of what feeds us. We would not live without it. And food is that which sustains us. And in my culture, in the Norwegian culture, food is love, right? I mean, you go into somebody's place, you're offending their hospitality if you can't share in what it is they're offering to you. I would say the first real rift as an adult, although I was a teenager still, but I was married and had a child, so I considered myself an adult, with my mother was when I began to tell her, you can't feed that to my children, or I'm not going to eat that. And later, of course, I realized that I was just overdoing it, and it was just a part of me trying to break away from her. And even if I still wanted to make those same choices, I could have done it in a kinder, gentler way in which I still honored what, she was trying to give to me and to give to my children. But, we live and learn. Okay, so you know me, I have to have a text. It's a very, very short story. But it's a story. See, I have a mini Bible because it's a short story. This story has had so many sermons and lessons and little pieces written about it that it's truly amazing that somehow, to me, now maybe I'm not coming into something with this that's new. I don't know. But I've never run across this before. This is the story of Mary and Martha and Jesus. And so, of course, I'll read it first. So now, when Jesus went on his way, this is from Luke, by the way, chapter 10, verse 38 through 42. When Jesus went on his way, he entered into a certain village, and there was a woman there who was named Martha, and she welcomed him into her home. Now she had a sister who was named Mary, who often sat at the feet of the Lord and listened attentively to his teaching. But Martha was distracted by much service, and she went to Jesus and said, "Lord, do you not care? My sister has left me alone to serve. Tell her to help me." But Jesus answered, "Martha, you are very anxious and troubled about much service. And you are troubled about many things, but only one thing is needed. Now Mary has chosen the greater portion, and it shall not be taken away." Now, how does this relate to deepening understanding about spiritual food? For me, what happened was I went, for the first time, Mary and Martha are the same person. They're not two different people. And service and introspection and going in and praying and meditating and deepening will needs be something that moves, at least me, in the direction of service. And in the old translations, in the oldest translations, you always hear it that it was about her serving and she was trying to make dinner and she just wanted, Mary to get up and set the table. Well, sorry, what it was about what we think of now as all the ways in which we volunteer, we give to charity, we, do good deeds. And so it's almost related in a sense to the idea that Paul made his revolutionary statement about faith without works is dead. And yet in the Reformation, it was very clear that that had also been misunderstood because it had gone into this rote place where people felt they could buy something spiritual by actions. It's really very, very fascinating. So I'll leave it to you to kind of think about it and to think about, who's your Mary, who's your Martha, and how can they, the way I'm deepening about that is how can I have them be together? Because I felt like what Jesus was saying, he wasn't admonishing Martha, I don't believe. And I don't think he was really necessarily extolling Mary over Martha. He was just talking about priorities and maybe the order in which we tend to what we need. Anyway, that's what I've been thinking about. And the other thing that I got from my spiritual advisor yesterday, and I'll tell you, this wasn't me, but I thought it was fantastic. She said, Jeannine, it's about comparisons. Comparisons are deadly, she said. Martha's, I'm doing the right thing. Why don't you tell Mary to do the right thing? And Mary, who's silent, that's very interesting. The truth doesn't need a defense. Doesn't get into the mix at all. But what came to me about that was that if I or you or anybody or the entire world altogether are really centered in truth, we don't even need to call on something that's outside of ourselves because it's already there. We're already at its feet. We are understanding. We are under it. Anyway, that's how that seemed to me. And I'm about to wrap up here. So I'll tell you one other fun thing. And that is that when I was a teenager, somebody gave me the book Autobiography of a Yogi by Paramhansa Yogananda. And there were certain yogis in his story that he was very, very intrigued by, and he and his friends and even his guru went to visit with these yogis because they were said to live on the ether, which is, to me, where's the oxygen, right? And Jesus at one point, of course it was in the esoteric Gospel of John, but he said, my food is to do the will of the one who has sent me. And yet, in that culture, feasting, banqueting, hospitality was incredibly important. So I don't think they're again, it's apples and oranges. They're not in the same place. He's saying, I am spiritually fed by doing the will of the one who sent me. And yet, I know these people need some food. Don't send them away hungry. I'll make some food. This is the same. Somehow we're meeting our physical, again, our emotional, our spiritual, and all of those needs somehow through the same vehicle. And perhaps it isn't just understanding. Perhaps it's all of it together, which we also talk about here. I've only got a few minutes left, so before we meditate, I will just give you our representatives. And I put a couple pictures up on the altar if you want to look at them, because I found some somewhat ethnically correct pictures of Huldah and of Thomas. But I looked it up, and Huldah, who was one of the 7 prophetess, says Sarah, Miriam, Deborah, Hannah, Abigail, Esther, and Huldah. And as some of you numerologists know, 7 is completion. But Huldah is particularly a representative of it was in the Daily Word too, flashes of insight. That which just comes and you know what you know, and you stand in the midst of it. And Thomas, this is another balance, right? Thomas is reasoning, tempered with proof. Now that makes me think of Charles Fillmore. He was a scientist, and he said, I am going to see if I can prove these principles. I am going to work with them and see if they actually are true. And that's the other, and then Myrtle was all heart almost. And so the two of them together were part of what brought us to this day, sitting in this unity, community. Oh, and gold. Gold. What it said about gold was that gold is the marriage of both heaven and earth. And that it brings, through our actions, there we go, its healing comes through actions and brings righteousness and the heavenly realm to the earth, which is so much like Jesus' kingdom of heaven. There's more metaphors in the teachings of Jesus in the Gospels and also in the other writings about the kingdom of heaven is this, the kingdom of heaven is that, the kingdom of heaven is this, and they were all metaphors of things that go on earth. And so somehow, that's how I'm fed. I am fed through, and maybe that's why tithes are a representative in Edwin's mind for putting God first, because you're taking that avenue, at least in our culture, that we need to be able to feed ourselves, to be able to clothe ourselves, to be able to have somewhere to live, to be able to eat, and that which we share with those who do not have those things. So I don't have a wrap-up, really. I just thought we'd go into some time and quiet and just think about those things, think about how we're fed, feel ourselves fed by the room here and the light, and each of you on Zoom in your room, wherever you are, and the light coming in, the golden light coming in, and feeling that we truly are centered and that we have what we need to stand upon, we have the oxygen we need to breathe, we have a rich, incredible existence that's filled with beauty. And as we breathe, we just recognize that. Breathing in and out. Breathing in the joy. And breathing out, we smile. Breathing in the weeping and the sorrow. And breathing out, we release and relax. Breathing in the deep understanding that is the all-loving goodness of our Creator, in whose glorious image we are made. We just feel our oneness with each other. Even though we seem to be separated, we know that we are indeed one. And that oneness is deeply rooted in that power and presence that expresses as love, expresses as joy, expresses as celebration and power and peace, as comfort, is the ability to wait, to have patience, to listen and to follow the guidance that we're given. For that we are deeply, deeply grateful, and we say, Amen. Amen and Amen. And we give thanks.